The rain hammered against the grimy windows of the Midnight Rose nightclub like bullets, each drop carrying the weight of Seattle's perpetual sorrow. Neon signs bled crimson and electric blue into the darkness, painting the wet streets in colors that promised everything and delivered nothing. Inside the club's suffocating embrace, smoke machines hissed their synthetic fog while bass lines pounded through flesh and bone, turning hearts into metronomes of desperate longing. Sophia Kane pressed her back against the bathroom wall, her hands trembling as she counted the crumpled bills in her purse. $43. Not enough for rent, not enough for food, not enough for the medication her mother needed. The mirror reflected a stranger wearing her face, someone with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much at 24. Dress clung to curves that drew attention she no longer wanted, but attention paid the bills. The bathroom door slammed open, and Marcus Delacroix filled the frame like a storm-given human form. 6 feet of lean muscle wrapped in expensive leather, his dark hair falling across angular features that belonged in Renaissance paintings. Tattoos crawled up his arms like promises written in a language only pain could translate. His gray eyes found hers in the mirror, and something electric sparked in the space between them. "Wrong door, pretty boy," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the way her pulse hammered against her throat. She'd learned long ago that showing fear was an invitation for wolves to feast. Marcus stepped inside, letting the door swing shut. Behind him, the music became muffled, creating an intimacy that felt dangerous. "Actually, I was looking for you." "Then you're dumber than you look." She turned to face him, chin raised in defiance that had become her armor. "I don't know you." Sophia Kane, 24, bartender here, 3 nights a week, waitress at Murphy's Diner on weekends. Lives in a studio apartment on Pike Street with a mother who has stage 4 lung cancer. His voice was velvet wrapped around steel, each word delivered with surgical precision. Mother needs experimental treatment that insurance won't cover. Treatment that costs exactly $200,000. The world tilted sideways. Sophia's hand found the sink's edge, knuckles white against the porcelain. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who can give you exactly what you need." Marcus reached into his jacket, and Sophia tensed, but he only pulled out a business card. Paper with silver lettering that caught the fluorescent light like fish scales. "I have a proposition. I'm not that kind of girl." A smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it held no warmth. "If you were, I wouldn't be interested. What I'm offering requires something much rarer than sex. It requires loyalty." Sophia stared at the card. No company name, just a phone number and an address in the warehouse district. Places where honest people didn't go after dark. "What kind of loyalty? It's the kind that asks no questions and leaves no traces?" Marcus moved closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, something that whispered of violence and power. "I need someone invisible, someone the authorities would never suspect. Someone with everything to lose and nothing left to give up." "You're talking about illegal work. I'm talking about survival." His eyes held hers, and she saw something unexpected there. Not predation, but recognition. Like looking into a funhouse mirror that reflected all her desperate edges back at her. "Your mother has maybe 6 months, less if she doesn't get treatment." The words hit like physical blows. Sophia had been avoiding Dr. Harrison's calls for 2 weeks, afraid to hear the numbers that would make her mother's death sentence official. "How do you know about my mother?" "'Cause I make it my business to know things. 'Cause information is the only currency that matters in this world." Marcus held out the card again. "One job. Clean, simple, lucrative. Enough to pay for your mother's treatment and set you up somewhere safe when it's done. And if I say no, then you go back to your $43 and watch the only person who ever loved you die. Slowly and painfully, because you were too proud to take help when it was offered." The bathroom felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in like a vice. Sophia's reflection stared back at her from the mirror, hollow-eyed and desperate. She thought of her mother's rattling cough, the way she tried to hide how much it hurt to breathe, the medical bills stacked on their kitchen table like a paper mountain of impossibility. What kind of job? The words escaped before she could stop them. Marcus's smile widened, showing teeth that were perfectly straight and predator white. The kind that changes everything. He placed the card on the sink's edge and stepped back toward the door. 24 hours to decide. After that, the offer disappears, and you go back to watching your mother fade away one breath at a time. The door swung shut behind him, leaving Sophia alone with her reflection and the weight of an impossible choice. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on the city, washing away sins that ran too deep to ever truly clean. She picked up the card, and the silver lettering seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. In the distance, thunder rolled. Across the Seattle skyline, like the voice of a god who had long since stopped caring about mercy, 24 hours to decide between damnation and salvation. 24 hours to discover they might be the same thing. The warehouse district breathed with the rhythm of forgotten industry, where rusted shipping containers stacked like giants building blocks against a sky the color of old bruises. Sophia's footsteps echoed off wet concrete as she navigated between puddles that reflected the amber glow of sodium streetlights. 23 hours and 47 minutes had crawled by since Marcus Delacroix had dropped his proposition into her life like a grenade with the pin already pulled. She found the address etched into a steel door that looked like it could stop a tank. No signs, no windows, just a single security camera that tracked her movement with mechanical precision. The card's silver lettering seemed to burn against her palm as she raised her fist to knock. The door opened before her knuckles touched. Metal. Punctual. I appreciate that in a business partner. Marcus stood silhouetted against warm light that spilled from the interior like honey. He'd traded his leather jacket for a black sweater that emphasized the lean strength of his shoulders. But his eyes held the same dangerous intelligence that had unnerved her in the nightclub bathroom. I haven't agreed to anything yet, but you're here. He stepped aside, gesturing her into a space that defied every expectation she'd built during the sleepless night before. Instead of the industrial wasteland she'd imagined, the warehouse had been transformed into something that belonged in architectural magazines. Exposed brick walls rose toward cathedral ceilings crossed with steel beams, while Edison bulb chandeliers cast warm pools of light over Persian rugs and leather furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Impressive, Sophia said, trying to keep the awe from her voice. Growing up poor had taught her that showing weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. My father believed that environment shapes behavior. Surround yourself with beauty, and you're more likely to create it. Surround yourself with ugliness, and you become it. Marcus poured amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses. Whiskey? It's older than you are. I don't drink when I'm making life-altering decisions. Smart. He set both glasses aside and moved to a wall dominated by monitors displaying security feeds from across the city. Streets, buildings, faces cycling through in an endless digital parade. Tell me about the night your father died. The question hit like a physical blow. Sophia's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment the warehouse walls seemed to press inward. That's none of your business. You were 16. Car accident on Highway 99, rainy night, just like tonight. Marcus's voice remained conversational, but each word carried the weight of careful research. Official report says he fell asleep at the wheel. But you know different, don't you? Stop. The word came out strangled, 8 years of buried pain clawing its way toward the surface. He was working 3 jobs trying to pay for your mother's first round of cancer treatment. 20-hour days, amphetamines to stay awake, desperation driving him harder than any addiction. Marcus turned from the monitors, and his gray eyes held something that might have been sympathy. He died because the system failed him, because people like me profit while people like him break themselves trying to survive. Why are you telling me this? Sophia's hands clenched into fists, nails digging crescents into her palms. Because I want you to understand that this isn't just about money. It's about taking something back from the machine that ground your father into dust and is doing the same thing to your mother. Marcus crossed to a desk where manila folders lay arranged. In perfect order, the job I'm offering targets someone who profits from other people's misery, someone who deserves what's coming. He opened the top folder, revealing photographs and documents that made Sophia's blood freeze. Senator Richard Blackwood smiled. From campaign photos, his silver hair and expensive suits radiating the kind of authority that opened doors and closed mouths. But the other photos told a different story. Meetings with pharmaceutical executives, bank statements showing accounts in the Cayman Islands. Medical records of patients denied coverage by insurance companies Blackwood's legislation protected. He's been blocking healthcare reform for 15 years, taking money from insurance companies while people like your mother die waiting for treatments they can't afford. Marcus's voice carried a cold fury that made the air itself seem to vibrate. His latest bill would eliminate the experimental treatment program your mother needs. It goes to vote next week. Sophia stared at the photographs, her mind reeling. You want me to kill a United States senator? I want you to deliver a package. What happens after that is not your concern. Marcus closed the folder with surgical precision. Blackwood has a weakness for young women who remind him of his deceased daughter. Similar age? Similar look? Similar background? You'll attend his private fundraiser tomorrow night as a volunteer coordinator. Security will be minimal because it's an intimate gathering. It's donors only. This is insane. I'm a bartender, not a professional. Killer, no. You're a survivor. Just like I was at your age. Marcus moved to the windows, looking out at the city lights that sparkled like fallen stars. My sister died because she couldn't afford insulin. 15 years old, honor roll student, played violin like an angel. She rationed her medication, trying to make it last longer. Died in my arms in a hospital parking lot while doctors inside debated whether treating her was financially viable. The raw pain in his voice made Sophia's chest tighten with unexpected empathy. Here was someone else who'd been ground down by a system that valued profit over human life. Someone else who'd watched helplessly as bureaucracy murdered the people they loved. That's why you do this, she said softly. It's not about money.
What?
Money is just the tool. Justice is the goal. Marcus turned back to her, and in his eyes, she saw the same desperate fury that burned in her own heart. Blackwood has blood on his hands. Thousands of people have died because of his policies. Your father might still be alive if healthcare was affordable. Your mother wouldn't be fighting for breath right now. Truth of it hit like a sledgehammer. All those nights watching her father stumble home exhausted. All those bills marked final notice. All those phone calls to insurance companies that ended with polite refusals and corporate sympathy. It hadn't been bad luck or cosmic unfairness. It had been policy, deliberate and calculated. The package, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What's in it? Something that will give Senator Blackwood exactly what he's given so many others. A chance to face mortality without the protection his wealth usually provides. Marcus pulled a small silver device from his pocket, no bigger than a thumb drive, completely untraceable. Activates 12 hours after delivery. By the time anyone realizes what happened, you'll be on a plane to wherever you want to start over. Sophia stared at the device, her mind racing through scenarios and consequences. Murder was wrong. She knew that. But was it murder to stop someone who was killing thousands through legislative violence? Was it justice to give Blackwood the same death sentence he'd given her mother? $200,000, Marcus said quietly. Wired to any account you specify. Your mother gets her treatment, you disappear, and the world becomes a slightly less evil place. And if I'm caught, you won't be. I'm very good at what I do, and I've been planning this for 3 years. His smile held no warmth, only predatory certainty. But if something goes wrong, you'll have enough money to hire the best lawyers in the country, more than Blackwood's victims ever had. Thunder rolled across the Seattle skyline, and rain began pattering against the warehouse windows like fingers tapping out a funeral march. Sophia thought of her mother's labored breathing, of medical bills that grew like cancer themselves, of a father who died exhausted and broken by a system designed to crush people like them. I need guarantees, she said finally. Name them. Half the money up front. Proof that my mother's treatment is already paid for before I go anywhere near Blackwood. And if this goes sideways, you'd disappear too. I won't be the only one paying the price. Marcus's smile widened, showing those predator white teeth. Now you're thinking like a professional. He walked to a safe hidden behind false brickwork, his fingers dancing across an electronic keypad. Inside, stacks of currency sat beside passports and weapons that looked military grade. He pulled out a tablet and began typing with practiced efficiency. Swiss account, completely anonymous. $100,000, available in 20 minutes. The tablet's screen showed banking information that made Sophia's head spin. Your mother's treatment paid in full. Dr. Harrison will receive confirmation tomorrow morning. The weight of the decision pressed down on her like deep ocean water, crushing and inescapable. Everything she'd believed about right and wrong seemed fragile suddenly, paper walls dissolving in the rain of necessity. But when she closed her eyes, she saw her father's funeral, her mother's struggle to breathe, thousands of other families destroyed by the same legislative machinery that kept men like Blackwood wealthy and powerful. "All right," she whispered, the word feeling like a knife sliding between her ribs. "I'll do it." Marcus handed her the silver device, and it felt warm against her palm, as if it contained its own heartbeat. "Welcome to the revolution, Sophia Kane. Tomorrow night, we balance the scales." Outside, lightning split the sky like God's own judgment, illuminating a city built on the bones of the desperate and the dreams of the damned. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel rose from downtown Seattle like a monument to old money and older secrets, its limestone facade gleaming under spotlights that turned raindrops into liquid diamonds. Sophia stood before her apartment mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back. The emerald dress Marcus had provided fit like it was sewn to her skin, silk whispering promises of wealth she'd never possessed. Diamond earrings caught the light with every movement, and the transformation was so complete she felt like she was wearing someone else's life. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Car outside. Remember your Rebecca Morgan. Tonight. Art history major. Trust fund baby. Daddy's little activist. You believe in causes the way rich girls believe in shopping." Gosh. Sophia touched the silver device hidden in her clutch, its weight both reassuring and terrifying. In 6 hours, Senator Richard Blackwood would be dead, and she would be $200,000 richer. In 6 hours, her mother would have a chance at life, and Sophia would discover what it felt like to have blood on her hands. The limousine that waited outside her building was longer than her apartment, and probably worth more. The driver, a mountain of a man in an expensive suit, nodded respectfully as he held the door open. Inside, champagne chilled in crystal flutes while soft jazz played from hidden speakers. This was how the other half lived, insulated from consequence by layers of wealth and privilege thick enough to stop bullets. The Blackwood estate perched on Mercer Island like a castle guarding a kingdom, its Georgian architecture speaking of power that had been accumulating for generations. Security was present but discreet, men in dark suits who watched with professional disinterest as guests arrived in vehicles that cost more than most people made in a decade. Sophia counted exits, noted camera positions, cataloged faces with the paranoid attention to detail that Marcus had drilled into her during their afternoon rehearsal. Miss Morgan. A woman in her 50s approached, her smile as perfectly maintained as her surgical enhancements. "I'm Catherine Winters, Senator Blackwood's chief of staff. We're so grateful for your family's continued support. Happy to help," Sophia replied, slipping into the carefully crafted persona Marcus had built for her. "Daddy always says that. Privilege comes with responsibility." The ballroom sparkled with enough crystal and gold to fund a small country's healthcare system. Guests moved through the space like sharks in expensive evening wear, their conversations a symphony of political maneuvering and social positioning. Sophia accepted a glass of wine she had no intention of drinking and began the careful dance of working her way toward her target. Senator Richard Blackwood held court near the fireplace, his silver hair catching the light like a crown. Smaller than she'd expected, his face carrying the soft corruption of a man who'd never missed a meal or worried about a bill. Power radiated from him in waves, the kind of authority that came from knowing the right people and owning the right. Politicians around him, donors and lobbyists, competed for his attention like courtiers seeking royal favor. "Fascinating conversation about healthcare reform," she said to a pharmaceutical executive whose wife wore enough diamonds to blind satellites. "I've been following the senator's work on the medical accessibility bill." The executive's eyes lit up with the fervor of a true believer. "Richard's been a godsend." Someone finally understands that unrestricted access to experimental treatments would bankrupt the entire system. Better to focus resources on proven therapies than waste money on desperate cases, like her mother, like Marcus's sister, like thousands of people whose lives were reduced to line items in actuarial tables. Sophia smiled and nodded, her fingers tightening around her wine glass until she feared it might shatter. Rebecca. Morgan, the voice behind her, carried the authority of absolute power wrapped in Southern charm. Dick Blackwood. I understand your family's been very generous to the cause. Sophia turned to face the man who'd authored her father's death sentence. And it took every ounce of willpower not to let her hatred show. Up close, Blackwood's eyes held the same empty coldness she'd seen in sharks at the aquarium. Predatory. Intelligence without empathy or remorse. Senator. It's an honor. She extended her hand, and when he took it, his fingers lingered just long enough to make her skin crawl. I've been following your career since college. Your work on limiting frivolous medical lawsuits has been particularly inspiring. A young woman with sense and beauty. How refreshing. Blackwood's smile revealed teeth that were too white and too perfect, like everything else about him. Walk with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the upcoming vote. They moved through the crowd toward a quieter alcove overlooking the estate's gardens. Rain streaked the windows, turning the landscape into an impressionist painting of shadows and reflected light. Sophia's pulse hammered against her throat as she calculated distance, timing, and opportunity. The device in her clutch seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, waiting for the moment that would change everything. You remind me of my daughter, Blackwood said, his voice carrying a note of genuine sadness that caught Sophia off guard. Sarah would have been your age now. Lost her to leukemia when she was 15. The words hit like a physical blow. This monster had lost a child to the same kind of disease that was killing her mother, yet he continued to block treatments that might save other people's children. The hypocrisy was so profound it left her breathless. I'm sorry for your loss, she managed, hating how the sympathy in her voice sounded genuine. She fought for 3 years. We tried everything. Spent millions on experimental treatments that weren't covered by insurance. Most families can't do that. Of course, they have to make impossible choices. His eyes grew distant, lost in memories that clearly still haunted him. Sometimes I think the lucky ones are those who can't afford false hope. False hope, called her mother's treatment. False hope, while blocking legislation that would make it accessible to everyone. The casual cruelty of it, delivered with paternal kindness, made Sophia's vision blur with rage. The thing about loss, Blackwood continued, is that it clarifies priorities. My Sarah's death taught me that resources are finite. It's better to focus on treatments with proven track records than waste money chasing miracles that probably won't work anyway. But what if they do work? The words escaped before Sophia could stop them. What if denying those treatments means condemning people who could have been saved? Blackwood's expression sharpened, the predator recognizing potential prey. You sound like someone with personal investment in the issue? A family member, perhaps? Sophia's blood turned to ice water. She'd let emotion override training, revealed. Too much in a moment of raw fury. Marcus's voice echoed in her memory. The moment you make it personal, you make mistakes. Mistakes get you killed. Academic interest, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. I wrote my senior thesis on healthcare policy. The human cost of legislative decisions. Ah, another bleeding heart who thinks good intentions can overcome economic reality. Blackwood's patronizing smile returned, but his eyes remained sharp and calculating. Let me give you some free advice, Rebecca. Compassion without pragmatism is just another form of cruelty. Better to save some than lose them all. They were alone now in the alcove, separated from the party by thick glass and 40 feet of Persian carpet. This was the moment Marcus had planned for, the opportunity she'd agreed to take. Her hand moved toward her clutch, fingers closing around. The silver device that would deliver justice disguised as tragedy, Blackwood said. Moving closer, there's something familiar about you. Have we met before? I don't think so. Sophia's thumb found the device's activation switch, Simple press that would set a chain of events in motion. I would have remembered. Maybe it's just that you remind me of someone. His hand settled on her lower back, possessive and presumptuous. Someone who used to work at a little nightclub downtown. Sophia something. Pretty girl, but rough. Around the edges, not refined like you. The world tilted sideways. He knew. Somehow impossibly, Richard Blackwood knew exactly who she was. The device felt like it was burning through her palm as she realized the magnitude of the trap closing. Around her. I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else, she said, but her voice betrayed her with the slightest tremor. Do I? Blackwood's smile widened, showing those predator teeth. God, I've been expecting you, Sophia Kane. Marcus Delacroix has been planning this little assassination attempt for months, and we've been watching every move. The silver device clattered to the floor as Sophia's nerveless fingers lost their grip. Around them, the party continued its elegant dance of power and privilege, but she felt like she was drowning in plain sight. Everything Marcus had told her, every careful plan they'd made, every promise of justice and redemption, had been a lie wrapped in her desperation and served with a bow. Surprised? Blackwood picked up the device, examining it with academic interest. Your boyfriend is very good, but I've been in this game longer than he's been alive. Did you really think I'd let some traumatized vigilante and his pet assassin threaten everything I've built? Where is he? The words came out as a whisper, carrying all the betrayal and terror she couldn't hide. Safe for now. Blackwood pocketed the device and gestured toward the windows, where Sophia now noticed additional security guards taking position. The question is, what happens to you? That depends entirely on how reasonable you're feeling. Outside, lightning split the Seattle sky like the sword of an avenging angel, illuminating a world where justice was just another commodity to be bought and sold by the highest bidder. The basement beneath the Blackwood estate breathed with the weight of buried secrets, its stone walls weeping moisture that tasted of corruption and old blood. Sophia hung suspended from chains that bit into her wrists, her emerald dress torn, and stained with evidence of the struggle that had brought her here. Time had become meaningless in this windowless tomb where emergency lighting cast shadows that moved like living things hungry for absolution that would never come. Footsteps echoed on stone stairs, measured and deliberate. Senator Richard Blackwood descended into his private hell, wearing the same paternal smile he'd shown upstairs. But now it carried the weight of absolute power exercised without witnesses or consequences. Behind him came two men in expensive suits who moved with the fluid grace of professional killers dressed for board meetings. Comfortable? Blackwood pulled up a metal chair and sat down, his proximity making Sophia's skin crawl with the intimate menace of a predator savoring the kill. I do apologize for the accommodations. This room serves a very specific purpose in my household. Go to hell, Sophia spat, blood from her split lips speckling the concrete floor like crimson rain. Such spirit, I can see why Marcus chose you. Blackwood crossed his legs with casual indifference to her suffering, though I suspect his motivations weren't entirely professional. Young men do have a tendency to let emotions cloud their judgment. The heavy door at the top of the stairs opened with a groan of rusted hinges, and new footsteps began their descent. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the rhythm, the particular way those boots struck stone. Marcus Delacroix emerged from the shadows. Her world shattered into pieces sharp enough to cut souls. He looked exactly as he had in the warehouse. All lean strength and dangerous intelligence, but now she saw the truth that had been hidden behind those gray eyes. Not the pain of someone who'd lost everything, but the cold calculation of a man who traded in other people's tragedies. His tattoos caught the harsh light, and she realized they weren't memorial art but kill marks. A living catalog of lives ended for money and power. Hello, beautiful, Marcus said, his voice carrying the same velvet menace that had seduced her. Into damnation? Miss me, you bastard. The words came out strangled, 8 hours of hope and terror crystallizing into pure betrayal. You lying, manipulative bastard, now? Is that any way to greet your business partner? Marcus pulled out a cigarette and lit it with practiced ease, the flame briefly illuminating features that seemed carved from nightmares. Though I suppose our arrangement has changed somewhat. Blackwood chuckled, the sound echoing off stone. Walls like the laughter of demons at a particularly good joke. She still thinks you were trying to kill me? How deliciously naive. The truth hit Sophia like a physical blow, stealing her breath and leaving her gasping like a fish drowning in air. The assassination attempt had been theater, an elaborate performance designed to achieve something far more valuable than one senator's death. But what could be worth more than justice for all the people Blackwood had killed with his legislative cruelty? The Prometheus files, Marcus said, as if reading her thoughts. Comprehensive records of every pharmaceutical company payoff, every buried study, every patient denied treatment for profit. 20 years of evidence that would destroy not just Blackwood, but half the medical establishment. Evidence that certain parties would pay handsomely to acquire, Blackwood added, his smile widening, or even more handsomely to ensure never sees the light of day. Sophia stared at Marcus, seeing him clearly for the first time, not a grieving brother seeking justice, but a businessman who'd recognized that her desperation made her the perfect tool for an elaborate con. The story about his sister, the righteous fury about healthcare reform. Even the careful way he'd researched her family's tragedy, all of it had been calculated manipulation designed to create the perfect patsy. There never was a sister, she whispered, the words cutting her throat like glass. You made it all up. Actually, there was a sister. She died exactly as I described. Marcus took a long drag from his cigarette, smoke wreathing his face like incense at a black mass. The difference is that I killed her myself. 15-year-old witnesses to family business can be problematic. The casual admission of fratricide delivered with the emotional weight of discussing weather patterns shattered something fundamental in Sophia's understanding of human evil. She'd thought Blackwood represented the pinnacle of corruption, but Marcus existed in a category of darkness that had no name in any language meant for civilized discourse. Why? The question emerged as barely a whisper. Why involve me at all? Because someone needed to take the fall when the files went missing, Blackwood explained with professorial patience. A grieving daughter seeking revenge for her mother's. Suffering makes a perfect scapegoat. The FBI will find evidence that you've been planning this for months. Motivated by desperation and manipulated by online extremists who promised miracle cures. Meanwhile, I disappear with merchandise worth $50 million to the right buyers, Marcus added. Pharmaceutical companies, insurance executives, politicians who can't afford to have their involvement exposed. Everyone wins, except you and my mother. Sophia's voice cracked on the words that mattered most. Will receive exactly the treatment I promised, along with a tragic phone call informing her that her daughter died in a terrorist attack while trying to assassinate a United States senator. Marcus's smile held all the warmth of winter graveyards. She'd spend her remaining months believing she raised a monster. Guilt might actually kill her faster than the cancer. The cruelty of it. The surgical precision with which he'd crafted suffering that would echo through generations, left Sophia breathless with a rage so pure it felt like religious revelation. But beneath the fury, her mind began working with the desperate clarity that came from having absolutely nothing left to lose. The files aren't here, she said, watching both men's expressions carefully. If they were, you wouldn't need this elaborate charade. You'd just take them and disappear. Marcus's cigarette paused halfway to his lips, and in that momentary hesitation, Sophia saw confirmation of her guess. Very good, beauty and brains. No wonder I almost felt guilty about this. They're in a safe deposit box, Blackwood said. Voice activation, biometric locks, dead man switch. If I don't check in every 72 hours, the files get released. To every major news outlet, if anything happens to me, which is why we needed you to kill him, Marcus continued. Someone with no connection to professional assassination, someone whose motives would be personal rather than financial. His death had to look like the desperate act of a grieving daughter, not a professional hit. But now that you've been caught, we move to Plan B. Blackwood stood and walked to a steel cabinet bolted to the wall, retrieving what looked like a medical kit. You're going to call Senator Blackwood and arrange a meeting to discuss your mother's treatment. Once we have access to the files, you'll kill him as originally planned, then die tragically in the ensuing struggle.
Better suicide.
Poetic justice for someone who thought she could play in our league. Marcus ground out his cigarette under his heel, the ember dying with a soft hiss. Your mother will get her treatment, funded by her daughter's martyrdom. She'll never know you died for money instead of justice. Sophia tested the chains holding her, feeling for any weakness in the links or mounting points. Professionally installed by someone who understood the physics of human desperation. But desperation had its own physics, and she'd learned long ago. That survival meant being willing to pay prices that civilized people couldn't imagine. There's just one problem with your plan, she said, keeping her voice steady, despite the terror clawing at her throat. Oh, Blackwood looked up from his medical kit, syringe glinting in the harsh light. You're both forgetting that I've got absolutely nothing left to lose. Sophia smiled, and it was every bit as predatory as anything Marcus or Blackwood had shown. Her, which makes me the most dangerous person in this room. Before either man could react, she wrenched her shoulders forward and up, dislocating her left thumb with a wet pop that sent lightning through her nervous system. The sudden slack in the chain allowed her to slip her hand free, blood making the metal slippery as she twisted toward. Marcus, with all the fury of someone who'd been pushed past the breaking point of human endurance, her fingernails raked across, his eyes drawing screams that echoed off stone walls like the cries of the damned. Marcus stumbled backward, clutching his face as blood seeped between his fingers. The cigarette lighter fell from his pocket, skittering across concrete toward the puddle of medical alcohol that had spilled when Blackwood dropped his kit. Her. Blackwood shouted, but his security guards were already moving, their hands reaching for weapons that would end this before it truly began. Sophia kicked the lighter into the alcohol with her last free movement, and the basement exploded into flame that painted the walls in hellish light. The men in expensive suits dove for cover as fire raced along chemical trails toward the wooden stairs, their exit route becoming a chimney that would trap them all in this stone tomb. You insane bitch. Marcus lunged toward her through the smoke, his ruined eyes weeping blood and fury. You'll kill us all. It's the idea, Sophia replied, her voice carrying the serene calm of someone who'd found peace in absolute destruction. The chain still held her right arm, but she'd accepted that some prices were worth paying if they bought the right kind of justice. Blackwood was screaming orders that no one could hear over the roar of flames, consuming 2 decades of hidden evidence along with the men who'd profited from it. The Prometheus files would burn with their creator, taking with them the secrets that had killed thousands and the possibility of justice for millions more. But in the growing inferno, as smoke filled her lungs and heat seared her skin, Sophia thought of her mother's labored breathing and realized that some sacrifices were worth making, even when they bought nothing but the knowledge that monsters could bleed. The last thing she saw before the smoke claimed her consciousness was Marcus Delacroix's face melting in the flames, his gray eyes finally showing the fear that all predators felt when they became prey. Above them, Blackwood Estate burned like a funeral pyre for the American dream, its smoke rising toward stars that had witnessed too much suffering to care about one more small act of desperate vengeance. 3 months later, Sophia Kane sat in a wheelchair beside her mother's hospital bed, watching sunrise paint the Seattle skyline in shades of forgiveness she wasn't sure she deserved. The burns on her arms had healed into silver scars that caught morning light like chains of memory, permanent reminders of the night she'd chosen, damnation over helplessness. Her mother's breathing came easier now. Experimental treatment, working miracles that insurance companies had claimed were financially impossible. The news said you were a hero, Margaret Kane whispered, her voice still fragile, but growing. Stronger each day? Said you stopped a terrorist plot against Senator Blackwood? Sophia squeezed her mother's hand, feeling the papery skin that was slowly regaining its warmth. The official story had been crafted by federal agents who understood that some truths were too complex for public consumption. Sophia Kane, marketing coordinator, turned unlikely hero, had infiltrated a domestic terrorist cell and died preventing an assassination that would have destabilized the government. The fire that consumed the Blackwood estate had been a tragic accident during the standoff, claiming the lives of the very criminals she'd been trying to stop. "I just did what needed to be done," Sophia said, the words carrying weight that would never fully leave her shoulders. The real story lived in classified files that would remain buried for decades. Senator Richard Blackwood's death in the basement fire had been ruled accidental, his reputation intact and his legislative legacy unchallenged. Marcus Delacroix had vanished without a trace, though whispers in certain circles suggested his body had been found in the ruins, burned beyond recognition. The Prometheus files had died with their creator, taking with them evidence that might have saved countless lives. But from the ashes of that night, something unexpected had grown. Margaret Kane's miraculous recovery had attracted media attention that spotlighted the experimental treatment program Blackwood had tried to eliminate. Public pressure forced congressional hearings, and within weeks, legislation passed that expanded access to exactly the kind of care that had saved her life. Sometimes justice came not through grand gestures of vengeance, but through the quiet persistence of ordinary people refusing to accept that suffering was inevitable. "There's someone here to see you," Dr. Harrison said, appearing in the doorway, with the careful smile of a man who'd learned to deliver both miracles and tragedies with equal professional compassion. "Says he's from the insurance company." Sophia's blood turned to ice water. She'd been expecting this visit for weeks, waiting for someone to connect the dots between her miraculous survival and the convenient appearance of funds to pay for her mother's treatment. The official investigation had accepted the terrorist cover story, but insurance companies had their own investigators who cared less about national security than about bottom lines. The man who entered wore an expensive suit that fit too well to be government issue, his silver hair and confident bearing marking him as someone accustomed to boardrooms rather than hospital wards. But it was his eyes that made Sophia's breath catch in her throat, green and intelligent and carrying a weight of knowledge that felt dangerous. "Miss Kane, I'm Jonathan Hayes from Meridian Insurance." He offered his hand with practiced professional courtesy, but something in his manner suggested this was not a routine visit. "I wanted to discuss your mother's policy personally." "Everything's been approved and paid for," Sophia said carefully, not taking the offered hand. "I have all the documentation." "Oh, I'm not here about the treatment. That's been handled through other channels." Haas pulled up a chair and sat down with the casual confidence of someone who belonged wherever he chose to be. "I'm here about the future." He opened a briefcase and pulled out a tablet computer, its screen displaying financial information that made Sophia's vision blur with shock. Account balances, investment portfolios, trust funds established in her name and her mother's, all backed by institutions she'd never heard of, but that radiated the kind of wealth that measured itself in generations rather than years. "The Blackwood Foundation," Hayes explained, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute power, established by the senator's will, to provide ongoing support for families affected by healthcare policy decisions. "Your mother's treatment is covered in perpetuity, along with living expenses, that should ensure neither of you ever worry about money again." "I don't understand." Sophia stared at the numbers on the screen, trying to make sense of generosity that seemed too good to be true. "Why would Blackwood leave money to help people like us?" Hayes smiled, and for a moment, his professional mask slipped enough to reveal something that might have been genuine sympathy. "Because sometimes even the worst people can be capable of redemption when faced with their own mortality." The senator's final months were spent reconsidering the consequences of his legislative choices. "Months?" Sophia's voice came out as barely a whisper. "He was sick. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed 6 months before the fire. Had perhaps weeks to live, which makes certain recent events somewhat academic from a medical standpoint." Hayes closed the tablet and returned it to his briefcase. His doctors recommended experimental treatments that weren't covered by his own insurance policies. Ironic, considering his voting record. The revelation hit Sophia like a physical blow. Blackwood had been dying anyway, his death in the basement fire merely accelerating an inevitable conclusion.
Her rage.
all her sacrifice, all the blood on her hands, had been spent on killing a man who was already condemned by the same medical system he'd helped create. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Because the Foundation needs an administrator, someone who understands both the system's failures and the human cost of those failures. Someone who's survived the kind of tragedy this money is meant to prevent." Hayes stood and straightened his tie, preparing to return to whatever shadow world had sent him. "The position comes with significant resources and complete autonomy. You'd have the power to help thousands of families avoid the choices you were forced to make." Sophia looked at her mother, sleeping peacefully in the kind of medical bed that cost more per day than most people made in a month. The scars on her arms ached with phantom fire, reminding her of the price she'd paid for the illusion of justice. But maybe that had been the point all along. Maybe true justice wasn't about punishing the guilty, but about preventing future victims. "I'll need time to think about it," she said finally. "Of course, but don't take too long. There are people out there right now facing the same impossible choices you faced 3 months ago. They need someone who understands that sometimes the system has to be fought from the inside." Hayes left his business card on the bedside table and departed as quietly as he'd arrived, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the weight of possibilities that felt both terrifying and redemptive. Sophia picked up the card, its heavy paper stock and embossed lettering, speaking of resources that could reshape lives. Outside, Seattle continued its eternal dance with rain and shadow. But for the first time in months, Sophia felt something that might eventually become hope. Not the desperate hope of the dying, but the patient hope of someone who'd survived hell and discovered that survival itself was a form of victory. Her mother stirred in the bed, eyes opening to focus on her daughter's face with the clarity that came from being pulled back from the edge of forever. "You look different," Margaret whispered. "Older, wiser. I feel different," Sophia admitted, touching the scars that marked her transformation from victim to survivor to something she was. "Still learning to define. Like I finally understand what I'm supposed to do with my life, and what's that?" Sophia smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. "Help people. Make sure no one else has to make the choices I made. Turn this whole nightmare into something that actually matters." Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand with strength that grew a little more each day. "Your father would be proud. Maybe he'd be horrified by what I became." Sophia looked out at the city that had shaped her into someone capable of survival at any cost. "But I think he'd understand that sometimes you have to break before you can heal." Thunder rumbled across the Seattle skyline, but this time it sounded less like judgment and more like the promise of storms that wash the world clean. In the distance, construction cranes were rebuilding the parts of the city that had burned, creating something new from the ashes of what had come before. Sophia Kane closed her eyes and listened to her mother's steady breathing, the sound that had become her definition of victory. Tomorrow she would call Jonathan Hayes and accept a position that would let her turn her scars into armor for other people's battles. Tonight, she would sit vigil beside the bed of the only person who'd ever loved her unconditionally, grateful for miracles that came disguised as tragedies and justice that sometimes wore the face of mercy. The fire that had claimed Marcus Delacroix and Richard Blackwood had also burned away the girl who'd once counted $43 as her net worth. In her place sat a woman who understood that true power came not from destroying your enemies, but from ensuring they could never create new victims. Outside, rain continued to fall on a city built from dreams and desperation, washing the streets clean for whatever tomorrow might bring. The end asterisk, like this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love, and let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers,